Hello and welcome to the Chess Pit, the podcast where three guys talk about chess occasionally, and we are again three today. I'm joined by my good friend Phil Makepeace.
Good morning.
My other good friend Robin Sarfas.
Good afternoon.
We are on the very last day of the year. We have just experienced the Rapid and Blitz tournaments. We are wrapping up a 2021 that I guess many people would like to forget. And speaking of things that we would like to forget, we are going to once again kick off by talking about FIDE ineptitude. So Phil informs me that Vidit didn't test because he would have forfeited the game because of time issues. There was obviously long queues for the testing facilities in Poland, and yeah, so I will go to our FIDE correspondent Phil Makepeace. Yeah, Phil.
Okay, so about this time yesterday, lunchtime on the 30th, going into day two, it was quite clear that something was badly wrong. We had just recorded our day one review, and as ever, it always happens where there is something big that happens immediately after record. And in this case, it was Nakamura, the world number 2, declaring that he had COVID or tested positive for COVID ahead of his flight back today. So presumably, Hikaru is not going to be able to leave Poland for a while. I don't know what the quarantine rules are there, but I imagine he'll be stuck in Poland for a good week now. He can't go back to the States. So, yeah, that happened. And then FIDE released this really pathetic tweet. It's basically written by an 8-year-old going, "Oh, Hikaru, we're really sorry. Woe is us. We're not going to make sure this doesn't happen again." And then Vidit immediately tweets from the queue for the testing, which is basically just the longest. It's like a queue for bread, as I said. It's just the longest queue you can imagine. And there's this tiny porter cabin trying to deal with 500 players worth of testing. And it became abundantly clear, given the round was starting about 45 minutes later, the first round of day two, that he wasn't going to make it back in time if he stayed in this queue. So he didn't get his mandatory test, and presumably lots of other players didn't either. So it was just a complete farce. And then owing to Nakamura, and it was Khabdudin as well, had to withdraw, I think, and a couple of the female players too, lower down. They delayed the round to make sure that the players Nakamura and Dudin had played got tested. And it was just a complete farce. And in the end, I think they delayed the first game yesterday by an hour. And it's just FIDE doing FIDE things. And in the end, actually, I think they were lucky that there weren't more. I mean, maybe there's more positive tests going to show up today as people try to get home. But it's just wild how they can't do anything right.
The impression I got as well was that Nakamura failed a PCR test that he had to take before he flew, rather than going through the testing facilities that the FIDE were putting on. So that'll be interesting to see if players are showing up with PCR tests, which have after having gone through a whole tournament of presumably more lateral flow tests, which don't show up these infections.
Possibly, yeah. I mean, Nakamura had told the organisers that he told FIDE that he was feeling unwell before the Rapid, which, I mean, it might explain his overall performance, taking lots of draws. He did actually remain unbeaten throughout. We talked about this. He defaulted in officially the first game yesterday, but that doesn't account for rating. So he didn't actually lose a single game. But yeah, as we said, he took lots of draws. That might explain that. So he said to FIDE, "I don't feel well." They gave him a test. It showed up negative. He then had the better test ahead of his flight, and that showed up as positive. So who knows?
Yeah, the obviously there it's well known that lateral flow tests are less kind of reliable. Obviously, that's their nature; they're much quicker, but less. They play fast and loose with the truth, the lateral flow tests. But yeah, and you get quite a lot of false negatives with them. What I think what it would be interesting to see if there is this like lagging effect right? Because you would expect that obviously all players were sort of testing and stuff in advance of the tournament. So in theory, you would hope that most of them went without COVID. But then obviously if one or two of them picked up at some point, you may well see that given the rate of transmission of Omicron, we might well see that lots of people are going to end up, that this could end up being sort of a super spreader event. It's kind of hard to blame FIDE for that because obviously, right, like all the players have sort of agreed to go ahead with the tournament, right? FIDE didn't make the virus and stuff, but the lack of provisions for sort of like quick testing to be done in a way that isn't, like it's supposed to be like a kind of, this is like a world championship event, right? Of like sport, like chess, which is supposed to be a sort of serious global sport in, that's what FIDE would contest. And so then to have, like, can you imagine if you had like all the players at the World Cup or something had to test for COVID and they were just, you had like Mo Salah and stuff just like stood in a car park, like it'd just be like ridiculous. And like, obviously I get that there's, they had to move the venue and the economic realities of the two are different, but it is just completely nonsensical. They're literally just stood queuing up for like a cabin in a car park. Like, it's sort of baffling that was the case, and that there were, because it's so obvious that this is also going to be an area where the spotlight is going to be on them. There is the sort of the COVID preparations aspect of it, and it's going to be, if it doesn't go right, it's going to be so obvious that it's gone wrong, and it's going to look terrible. You would just think from a PR standpoint, whether or not they actually care about the well-being of the players, right? You would still think that they have to like look like they care about the well-being of the players, and so it's just completely absurd. But hey, I've heard that you can just get blocked by Nigel Short, and then you're immune from COVID. So
the behavior, FIDE's behavior as such, has gained the attention of this guy, Professor Jose Luis Jimenez, who's been putting together a World Hall of Shame for poor practices against transmission of Omicron. And so, he says, indoors, many without masks or below nose or poorly fitting surgical cloth, no match for a fast spreading airborne virus. So he has added FIDE to his Hall of Shame. We've also got this, we did retweet this thing from Peter Heine Nielsen, who's NRK, the Norwegian broadcaster, have been doing some little digging into the COVID protocols. And players told in advance that they'd be testing every 2 days. NRK have contacted both FIDE and the organisers. None replied. The NRK visited the doctor's office at the venue. No tests available, nor any suggestions of where to get them. So it just sounds like the whole thing might have actually just not, like, maybe these were just dummy tests. I mean, that's a bold claim, but this whole thing is just mad, isn't it?
Yeah, I think the thing that frustrates me is that there seems to be this idea that because the venues was changed at late notice, that therefore it sort of lets them off the hook, when actually that's completely the opposite, right? The point is that if they weren't going to be able to provide a proper venue and tournament conditions for like safe play, then they shouldn't have moved it anyway. They should have just cancelled it. And I think that's the thing that I can't get my head around it, is that when you move it from one place to another because you can't get the correct protocols in one place, you've got to be sure as hell to make sure you get the protocols right when you move into the next place. And they clearly haven't done that. I mean, even one test per 2 days for a tournament where you're interacting with a lot of people over the course of 6 hours just seems insane anyway. Like that doesn't seem enough. But I guess these sorts of issues are gonna roll on. But just one thought that I've noticed that Japan is showing up in the media a lot at the moment because they have really low transmission rates. And I noticed that one of the things that they've done is that they've put a lot of time and effort into, and money, I guess, into getting filtration systems for indoor spaces. And that seems to be doing a really good job. So I wonder whether or not we will start seeing this having to happen. I think a lot of people kind of think vaccination is the solution, but I think there are other ways that you can actually mitigate infectious spread. And I think we'll start having to see more of these things happen. And it'll be fascinating to see whether or not FIDE gets on board with that sooner rather than later as well.
Well, things maybe. Air things can come in. And,
exactly. It's not going to just be what's the moisture in your room. It's going to be like what's the COVID content in your room. And Nakamura's looking quite ill at the moment. Let's just check his Air Things device. Right, we could talk about this all day long, no doubt. But let's move on and talk about the actual chess. So with Nakamura out, Dubov got a walkover, and then actually kicked on himself a little bit.
We should talk about Daniel Dubov.
Well, we should, yeah, because he got to within touching distance of the prize, and then took a draw pretty prematurely.
He going into the last round, he was one of a number of players tied on 14 points, but the key component of this being a number of players tied on 14 points, many of whom were sort of playing each other. Like, this wasn't a situation like in the Rapid, right, where Nepomniachtchi, by drawing, by sort of basically agreeing a draw very early with Caruana, he was guaranteeing himself at least a spot in the tiebreak. This was a situation where if results went Dubov's way and he got a draw, he would have got into a tiebreak. But as it transpired, basically he took a very quick draw in round 21 with the white pieces, and then he had the book halts. So had there been a tiebreak situation, he definitely would have played in it. But multiple players just ended up on more points than him, and he lost because that seems like a woefully short-sighted decision. I mean, I guess, maybe you could argue I'm sure that he got more prize money for finishing 14.5 than he would have done had he gone on to lose that game and finished on 14. But it seems like that's pretty.
It was a business decision, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's a pretty damning indictment, though, of how much the players see the sort of how much the players value the actual prestige of these things versus just the idea of getting some money from them. I mean, especially you think like Daniel Dubov's probably, like, given his standing in world chess, I don't know, he's probably doing okay, although maybe he's anticipating a sort of cut off of funds from the Russian government or the Russian Federation in 2020. Perhaps he's not been allocated such a decent stipend from the budget, so maybe that's playing into his mind. Maybe he'll maybe he should be looking for a grant from the Norwegian government or something. But
I don't know how the tiebreaks thing works though in this situation. Would it be the case that he knew that even if he won, he wouldn't be getting through? Presumably.
No.
I mean, I guess
He had really favourable tiebreaks. So his point was he was basically banking on the idea that I'll end up on 14.5, and then and that'll be the top score, and so then I'll get into a tiebreak at least or something. But it was just eminently wrong because multiple players finished on 14.5 out of 21, and several players finished out on 15.
The tiebreak works, so it just adds the totals of the players you've played. So it's basically a strength of field tiebreak, like they have in the NFL. We should say that after the Rapid controversy, the same tiebreak playoff nonsense was in place here, with only two players going through to a playoff. So it was always, I mean,
my suggestion was that for the Blitz they should have had a round robin classical tiebreak.
It doesn't make sense to have a Blitz player for a Blitz tournament, right? You want a different format.
Exactly. The precedent is set that the tiebreak is always a different format to the main event. So they should. You
haven't been able to separate them in one format, so you have to go to another format. That's just what you take, right?
They have to play like Bug House or something, or
shove Hakening.
That would be a way to end Magnus's domination at the top level of chess if all the tie breaks were like football related.
So that I guess the playoff shenanigans that we saw there, tiebreak shenanigans that we saw there were funny because we saw Magnus collapsing in a game, which meant that as a result, Alireza Firouzja ended up not competing in the tiebreak playoff, which there seems to be a lot of narrative building up between those two. But obviously Firouzja
my buddy Jeremy is insisting that Magnus is just waging like psychological warfare against Alireza at this point. And this is like just a long-term strategy just to completely like destroy this teenager, like psychologically and emotionally, right? Like just everything he seems to do. Did you see in the Rapids where he sat down against Alireza and just sat down and had like a minute and a half think on move 2?
It's definitely.
But he's obviously throwing it. I mean, obviously, I say, but the idea being that he potentially threw against MVL yesterday just to push Alireza out of the tiebreak.
Exactly. I think interesting that both of the players that you predicted to win the Rapids were right up there in the Blitz. So I think, Robin, you went with Jan Christoph, and Phil, you went with Ali Reza, and there was a chance that they could both. Well, I mean, they both finished on the most amount of points.
If Magnus had held on to a draw against MBL, that would have been the playoff. I mean, I think it's not that surprising given we chose good chess players, and good chess players are good among the sort of many formats, I think. But it makes sense. They're both quite young. They're both sort of young, up and coming players. Obviously, Alireza is like talked about a lot and is sort of like the hottest kind of name emerging on the world scene. But Jan Christoph Duda is like what, 21, 22 maybe. He's young.
Yeah, we should start pronouncing it correctly. There was a 20-minute discussion between Leko and Gustafsson of various Polish names yesterday, and they settled on Jan Krzysztof Duda.
Jan Krzysztof Duda.
Yeah, Jan Krzysztof.
Who
was your dark horse? I forgot it, Robin.
For the Blitz.
Yeah.
That's
probably MVL or something.
Magnus.
Yeah.
I can't actually remember who my dark horse was for the Blitz. I just remember. I think I just looked at a long list of names and just was like, well, it could be anyone, right?
Yeah, I mean, my dark horse came up with was involved in the two most memeable incidents from the entire thing. Yeah, so Tigran Petrosian actually did all right. He lost his final round game.
Tigran.
Yeah. He lost his final round game, which meant he dropped back down the standings. But he had only been 2 points off the lead before that, but he finished on 12. At the end of that, there's just a picture of him just sitting with his head in his hands for
he looked like he was genuinely crying. Like,
yeah.
Genuinely upset.
Yeah, he's clearly a very emotional man. That's nothing that he has ever done has given the impression otherwise. Is it worth mentioning that we picked Peter Svidler to do really badly at these tournaments, and he just didn't even bother turning up? I think we're definitely in his head.
Yeah. But there's the other one that Petrosian was involved in was Pavel Tetslav falling off his chair. When he's blundered into mate in 2. So Petrosian was involved in good ways. So he was a fun horse, not so much as a dark horse.
The exact opposite reaction of that guy who blundered mate in 2 against Anish when 2 pawns up in a queen end game, who just sort of stood there and sat there in the most stoic fashion, but you just seemingly just completely dead behind the eyes. Did you see this game?
No,
it was two connected pass pawns on sort of like the, I don't know, maybe a 4th and 5th ranks or 5th and 6th ranks, I think, for this guy playing a niche, and then he just ends up getting his king sort of in the sort of nook of the 2 pawns, and he's just hanging mate into.
Was this Puranik?
I'm not sure. This was back on the first day of the Rapids, I think.
Oh, the Rapid. Okay. Well,
yeah.
That information to hand. We're covering the Blitz.
It does feel like one tournament, really, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Maybe that's what they should do. They should do an aggregate, and that's
make it like the World Rapid and Blitz.
Yeah, because that was what really annoyed me about trying to do tweets, because you couldn't just go round 2 of Rapid Blitz, which was the hashtag. You had to actually name the thing and then put the hashtag at the end.
It's interesting, actually, just sort of on a sort of serious note, talking about this. There were people after the Rapid were finishing, sort of suggesting that 13 rounds wasn't enough and stuff. We sort of discussed this before, and then later on we saw people complaining about it on Twitter as well. I think a couple of people had said it should be 15 rounds, just because obviously you get the situation where you get too many players bunched on the same number, like your tournament's not long enough if you're not separate. I guess the Blitz goes to sort of disprove that, right? You can have as many rounds as you want, but if lots of people score the same number of points, you're still going to end up in that situation. Obviously, the Blitz was a bit of an aberration this year, just because that was such a low winning score, right? Like sort of a 1.5 off, sort of like the lowest recent winning margin, which is quite seems quite unlikely, and is obviously going to contribute to a bit of a bunching. There's lots of attrition there, but I guess it does sort of like you do ultimately have to have some sort of system of breaking ties. Possibly not this one, but
I do wonder. I was going to talk about Magnus maybe just quickly. I know that it's cliche to talk about him, but you mentioned yesterday, Phil, that he played really, really badly and was still there and thereabouts at the end of the tournament. And Robin's just mentioned that it was the lowest score ever. I mean, I wonder whether or not you guys think that the impact of the COVID disruption actually played a part in that at all. Obviously, this isn't like a normal tournament. As you have to go through all of those checks, etc. And you're aware of the fact that COVID is around. And then obviously when players start pulling out because of infections and you get messed around for an hour or so at the beginning of the day, presumably that will impact the way that players are playing, right?
Yeah, I think maybe you have to separate the Rapid and the Blitz there, I think, a little bit, because everything seemed to be going actually okay. At the Rapid, there were a few grumbles and stuff like that, but it was obviously the Blitz was the one where some players had actually tested positive and stuff, and you just wonder if the kind of stress associated with all those goings on was just impacted people's ability to play like at the absolute top, anyone's ability to play at the absolute top of their game, which led to sort of no one really sort of breaking out and pushing ahead to win it, which you would normally expect, I think. And so that may have contributed to the fact that it was just a lot of people to sort of not quite at their best and stuff, but because they're all good players, you're still going to get the sort of the top players sort of there and thereabouts. Magnus's issues, I think, it stemmed from the fact that he obviously got a bit behind and then was probably pushing a little bit more going on like that. Like it's that last round game, right? Like he obviously ended up in a really dreadful position, but the game against MVL, but he knew that only a win would do for him and stuff. And he probably, once the tide had turned, right, there was very little he could kind of had to play for. So I think that for Magnus specifically, right, because there's so much only really a win matters to him, right? He, of all the players, is going to care least about the prize money. But yeah, it does. You do wonder how many of them just kind of wanted to get out of there towards the end. Maybe that contributed to stuff like Dudov being happy to make some draws as well. Just be to be honest, I've done all right here. I'll just take my prize money and go home.
What do you make of Magnus, Phil? In terms of, obviously, it was a fairly disappointing couple of tournaments for him.
I think that we're still at a point where, he finished in a tie for first in the Rapid and was half a point off the lead going into the final round in the Blitz. He's still clearly very competitive. It was the surprising factor was how many games he lost. But equally, he probably won more games that way than, I don't know, this whole thing where it's like the 3-1 system. He just, if the 3-1 system had been in place, he'd been in excellent shape with the number of wins he had and very few draws. So, he clearly very disappointed, but I don't think that there's an awful lot generally wrong. The narrative of who he lost to is the entertaining bit, right? Where he lost to Geary, he lost to MVL, he lost to who did he lose to in the Rapid?
Shoko.
No, he lost to Sochko in the Blitz.
He lost to the Abu Sattarov.
Yeah, so all he's lost to a kind of bunch of a mixture of rivals and kids, and then Sochko's just a weird one.
But still absolutely caned Ali Reza.
Yeah,
I reckon that's fine. More of a meme, right, Magnus? He went out, lose every single game deliberately, and then just beat Ali Reza.
It was just the only games that he won was to make sure that he would eventually be near Ali Reza so that they get selected in a game together. Right? Yeah. Let's talk about Levin Aronian, because we talked about him a lot yesterday and talked about. I mean, at the time, he looked like he was really going for it, right? So, Phil, what's your take on Levin Aronian's tournament?
It was just bizarre. He was a point and a half clear after 16 rounds. He beats Geary, and then he's on 13 out of 16. He's a point and a half clear. And then he just loses to MVL, but he's still then half a point clear, but then he loses to Martirosyan and Artemiev, but then recovers brilliantly to beat Sindarov in round 20, which puts him in this possible tiebreak situation, but loses to Firouzja. He just ran out of gas. We talked about maybe Sindarov would run out of gas, and that happened to him as well. Sindarov in the end Well, he didn't quite run out of gas as such, as just didn't play as consistently as he had on day one. But yeah, Aronian he had this weird one against it. MVL was such a weird game where he's a point and a half clear. And Lecco on commentary is going, just play, it was a such and such move, like King G7 or something. Just play this move, or Rook D8. Just play Rook D8, just swap everything off, take the draw, move on. You're miles ahead in the tournament. And he just didn't quite have that practicality for leading a tournament by so much that he was continuing to play for wins, which is admirable in one way, but he just all three of those games followed that pattern of just playing for wins when he really should have just settled for draws. And it would have been enough easily because he finished with one loss.
There's a romantic way of looking at it, right? Which is that he cares about, he's trying to get the most out of every game, right? And he's not, necessarily just playing for sort of, because it is one could argue it's a slightly cynical mentality to have, right? To say, okay, well, I'm just ahead, play for draws, right? And like when he might be saying, well, I want to, play the best move in any situation, right? Which I think might lead me to win and stuff. He does, but with that being said, he does have a reputation, Aronian, for not always performing sort of when the pressure's really on. He's never done that well in the candidates, for example. It's a shame for him because he's, by all accounts, a very nice guy. Good to see him put in a good performance, though. Should we mention? We should probably talk about the actual winner.
Yeah, we should talk about MVL,
especially because I don't think we've mentioned who won over the entire course of this episode.
Well, it's a very left field winner, isn't it? Because up until a few days ago, we were talking about how MVL had probably had 2021 to forget. Pretty much, he bombed out of the candidates, and
came second in the candidates.
He came second, John.
Yeah, but he bombed out in terms of like we expected.
He had the lead and didn't.
He had the lead and then obviously didn't. Yeah, and then. Obviously, it's not been a great year for him, and we saw him tweeting a few days ago complaining about the situation in Poland for these tournaments, and in the end turns around and wins things. So what did you make of MVL, Robin?
It's another psychological blow for Ali Reza that another French guy, another person, representing France, won. I mean he's an excellent player at fast time controls. It was, and I guess given his particular style of play, which is that he plays quite narrow stuff, right? He always plays the same openings, basically. Probably in Blitz, when there's going to be less like preparation and stuff against him in these sorts of tournaments. So that probably works well for him. But yeah, it's nice to see. Obviously, he's obviously just absolutely loves chess, does MVL and stuff. So it's sort of nice for him to end the year on a high. And stuff when he obviously he was clearly in bad form, not just at the candidates but sort of looking at sort of the online play and things like that. He's had quite a lot of poor results and stuff, and seemed to be the pressure of leading in the candidates seemed to sort of weigh on him in the gap between the two. Sort of that was obviously mostly in 2020, but yeah, hopefully he'll emerge from this, and there's still plenty of chess left in MVL, I think. So hopefully he might have about a bit of a bounce back. He's playing in the Grand Prix, right? So it'd be nice to see him put in a good showing there. He must be sort of probably in the sort of second or third kind of a group of people favoured to do well in the Grand Prix, I would expect.
Yeah, Phil, do you expect to see him in the candidates this coming year?
It's such a broad and strong field who haven't qualified yet, right? I mean, you've got all of these guys in there, Geary, So, Ding.
You're saying you would expect to see him
himself.
That'd be a pretty bold take to say you expect to see him in there, but he's certainly in with a chance, right? He's up there with those players.
Clearly, he's playing well. It can't be bad for him. I mean, his day 2 performance was just unreal. He got 7 out of 9 and just kept scooting through,
which is extremely good, considering that's the point at which you'll play. You expect your harder games to be on day 2, right? Once the field becomes a sort of order, once the order sort of makes itself more felt.
And we should talk again about the Central Asian teenage stars again. So Asabayeva crushing in the Blitz after a silver in the Rapid. So nice to see there. Phil, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, clearly there's a bunch of these Central Asian teenagers coming through, both in the men's and women's game, and it's emerging markets. It's good. It's good for the game, and clearly there's a lot of investment being happening there, and something's. I don't really know what Kazakhstani and Uzbekistani, those are the nationalities rather than the ethnicities. What their infrastructure looks like, but I'm assuming it takes its lead from sort of ex-Soviet things, and maybe they have some very good coaches, but something's brewing. I mean, it's not just like one player. This is 3 or 4, right? And so things are happening.
It's different when you compare it to, like, for example, the growth of players from China and India, because those countries obviously have such massive populations and the talent pool is so broad, right? Whereas not that the Central European countries are small per se, but it's not. You put it this way: there's a wide range of sort of sports or fields where you're seeing huge growth in sort of representation of people from India and China. That's not the case already for a lot of these Central Asian countries. So it's very interesting to see, and it must be that there's sort of a decided effort has gone into sort of the infrastructure and the development there.
Yeah, and I guess to cap things off with the most important topic of the tournament, I know that Phil feels very strongly about Peter Leko's lack of a second screen, and unfortunately those problems were not resolved, Phil.
It was just ludicrous, wasn't it? I mean, we were sort of talking to each other yesterday, and you were saying that it's just embarrassing, is it not? Just to have someone asking who's leading the tournament when they're commentating on it.
I would actually like to see Leko not have any screens. I would like to see him. He's trying to comment, and he's just yelling the whole time. What's going on? Who's playing? What moves have been played?
That's what he was doing anyway. To be fair,
basically attempting to hold like 100, like a sort of 90 board symbol in his head, which he also has to comment on.
Yeah, it was mad, and I mean, he got to the 19th round of the Blitz, and he had no idea how many games were left. Things like that, which I kind of thought was funny, and the interplay between him and Jan Gustafsson is hilarious as well. Like the most sardonic man and the most innocently like face value man ever having conversations about things was quite funny.
Leko's always extremely earnest. And
Jan is very much never earnest.
Yeah.
And between those two, it makes for good watching, I think.
Yeah.
We've had a couple of questions from John Gallagher via Twitter asking about this kind of stuff. So the first one was, with Chess 24, not Test 24. I've talked a lot about tests today, but
I've heard that
Chess 24
are going to be the next sponsors of the FIDE sponsor of the
championship.
With Chess 24 presumably having lots of money, how have they wound up relying on their commentators' home Wi-Fi? Because Jan's was dropping in and out a little bit. I guess it's
hard to do. I mean, what you can and also you can send them like a 5G kind of mobile box they can plug to their computer or whatever. So that's still ultimately relying on someone else's like infrastructure, right? They're not going to be like doing massive infrastructure works in like Hamburg or wherever it is that Gustafsson lives to like pump in some like extra fast fiber broadband for him. It's particularly when like they have such a wide stable of commentators and stuff. I kind of think it's just the nature of things that you're going to get if you've got online broadcasts and stuff. That's going to be it's going to happen, right? You see it happen in all sorts of spheres. So
I mean, it was funny that Jan's daughter kept coming down, joining in the commentary, complaining that she couldn't watch her Disney films because the Wi-Fi was so bad because everything was being taken up by Jan doing her daddy doing commentary. The second question was, what's the story with Jan Gustafsson's French? Now, I'm assuming this is French language rather than the
French
opening.
defense.
Was it? Because he was all the time he was going allez les bleus. Like that was his sort of stock phrase every time someone like pushed a pawn. Allez les bleus. Did you catch up? Did you pick up on this?
he's just a bit of a memer, right? He'll just start saying stuff and he'll just kind of run with it. I feel like that's there's not too much to read into this. I don't know.
Vladislav,
baby, you don't hurt me. Yeah, that was a good line. And it was very apropos. It was very well delivered at the time.
Presumably met with a completely nonplussed reaction from Peter Lecco as well.
Met with a "What's going on?" from Peter Lecco. Yeah, I have a lot of time.
Yes, I have heard this song.
Yeah. Now back to the chess. I imagine that off air, he's just like, Jan, why do you keep not talking about the chess? Yeah. But it would be good to see more of Jan Gustafsson in commentary this coming year, preferably with his sidekick, Peter Svidler, who, since we've driven him away from competitive chess, may become a reality. But I think this pretty much brings us to the end of what's been a large and rambunctious review of what went on in the Blitz tournament this time round. We will be back next week with a bit more of a retrospective, looking back on 2021, looking forward to 2022. And I guess as part of that, Phil, you wanted us to put a shout out for people to talk about what they think that the top 10 lists for both men's and women's will look like in a year's time. So when we get to the end of the Rapid and Blitz 2022, who do we expect to see in that top 10 rating system? And
this seems quite labor intensive to have to come up with a top 10 for people.
Yeah, I thought so, but then I looked at the top 10 and I was like, basically you have to think who's going to drop out and who's going to replace them.
I think maybe it might be simpler just to ask for suggestions of who's likely going to break
maybe
in,
three players who are going to drop out of the top 10.
I'll put it this way, I'm not bothering with, I'm not coming up with a whole list of 10. So
yeah, I don't, to be honest, I don't think it's that much of hard work. I guess the thing is just going to be like 3 players who drop out, 3 players who pop in. So yeah, maybe that's the better way of doing it. So yeah, nice to have people asking nonsense questions. If anything, it detracts away from us asking nonsense questions. So thanks for that, John James Gallagher. But yeah, we should bring this to a close because this is easily one of the longest live streams we've done. But it's been good fun. It's been a good fun year. Streaming with you guys. I think it's been great doing the World Championship into the Rapid and then Blitz. So hopefully we'll be able to do more of this as time goes by. But I will draw this stream to an end and I'll press the end broadcast button and then wait for the wheel of death to go around. But thank you both for